Before inviting my fellow panelists to join me on stage, I would like to start with sharing a few facts and figures about climate change. I think most of these are very well known to us in the insurance sector, but I think it helps to focus minds maybe and really have a discussion about the solutions that the sector can bring. So I think there will be slides being put. I see they're being brought. Yes, I see them on the screen in front of me, but not on the big screen. Yes. So let's start with the start. It all starts with greenhouse gas emissions, and the most relevant one is CO2. And this slide is a reminder of the evolution of CO2 emissions and in turn of concentration into the atmosphere. And the bad news here is that 2023 was yet again a record year in terms of emissions, meaning we are not yet where we need to be in terms of the path that was, for instance, again established in Paris in COP21. This is, of course, due to largely greenhouse gas emissions coming from fossil fuels. And here as well, despite the significant increase in renewable energies, in the production of energy, we see that the role of gas, oil and coal continues to be significant. And the concern is that there is a clear link between those emissions, those concentrations of gases, and temperatures. And this is a long-term perspective, but we see a clear correlation. And when it comes to temperature increases, while the trend has been clear for some time, since June last year in particular, there has been something that happened, probably a combination between climate change and the El Niño phenomenon. But since June 2023, we have seen record temperatures being broken on a daily basis. That concerns surface air temperature, but importantly as well, and even more spectacularly, sea surface temperature on all the seas of the world. We can look at this from many points of view. And from an insurance perspective, one of the consequences, of course, the natural catastrophes, which, as Frédéric mentioned, are increasing in intensity and in severity. And that can be, again, translated into various ways. One way of looking at it is to look at nat cat losses as a percentage of GDP, and we see also here a clear trend. It's obviously not related to climate change only, or the phenomenon are important to keep in mind, like where we build, how we build, and the value of the assets being covered, but still the trend is important. And the reality is also that this translates into natural catastrophe events, which we have seen a lot of recently. We see that Asia is still the most affected continent in terms of typhoons and cyclones in particular, but we have also seen recently important floods in California. Brazil has been significantly, also in the eastern part of Africa, like Kenya. Brazil has been first affected by an unprecedented heat wave, followed by more recently significant floods. So this is just a couple of illustrations of the issues at stake in relation to climate change. These facts are not necessarily cryptic or dry, as to use the words used by Arnaud earlier, but they are worrying, as the third concept used. But today we are here to look at the solutions that our sector can bring to those challenges in terms of the fight against climate change and in terms of offering protection. And for that we have an excellent panel. Very much welcome to all of you. And I would like to start this discussion by a simple question, and I would like to ask the question to the three panelists who have not taken the floor yet. I would like to invite you to share your own strategic priorities in the area of climate resilience, and let's say your view on the future of climate insurance. That would be to introduce the discussion, then we will delve into some of those topics. And so we have Laurie, Wing-Heier with us, who is carrying several hats. You are director of the Alaska Division of Insurance, you are co-chair of the NAIC's Climate and Resilience Task Force, and you are the NAIC's representative on the Sustainable Insurance Forum. May I invite you to kick off the discussion?
Certainly, and thank you for having me here today. It's a delight to be in Helsinki, and I have enjoyed the weather. Anchorage, Alaska is on the same latitude, and we're much cooler this time of year, so this has been a delight. I think when we look at the strategic priorities from the NAIC and for me as the regulator in Alaska, a lot of it has to do with working with consumers. We've touched on that a little bit today, but consumers to this day are not looking at losses and putting it together with climate change. We just went through a series of storms in the Midwest of the U.S., somewhere close to $10 billion in losses. And consumers aren't seeing it as climate change. There may be a little bit of a thought in the back of their mind, but they're not seeing it like we are, that this is happening around the world and the billions and billions of dollars. What they do see is when their rates are going up, why are my rates going up? I myself have not had a loss, and so we're doing a lot of explaining that, the nature of insurance is to spread the risk, so we're all in this together. So I think, certainly working with consumers to understand the changes. And in that, we need to start working with our local, our state, and our federal officials on changing our zoning laws, our construction laws of how we build and where we build. Because in Alaska and other parts of the U.S. where we're seeing the losses, in some cases are places we never should have built. We never should have allowed that type of construction. And to continue to work with our industry partners. And as a regulator, I can tell you that I think for me, I need to listen more to what the industry is telling me and sharing data that is coming across that you're getting that I may not have, to see what the modeling is saying. And it may mean going to changing our regulations or our statutes, but we need to work closer with the industry to understand what is happening to them. Not just as respects solvency, but as respects to sustainability in the future. And that's not necessarily been our attitude before, is to listen too much to the industry as to how we can manage this in somewhat of a public-private partnership.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Hans de Cuyper, you are CEO of Ageas Group, so you will provide an insurance perspective on the question, please.
Yep. Well, first of all, over the last 20 years, I think the insurers have been doing pretty well with this topic. We have seen that we have been able to keep the attritional losses on a decrease in frequency and in impact, thanks to technology, thanks to data, thanks to connectivity of the property. And actually that effect we have been able until now to absorb most of the effect from these natural disasters. And keeping, because we sometimes forget this element, keeping the premium affordable for the customers and I would say the citizens at large, driving including. So as that said, the model I think has worked, but I think we have reached a tipping point. And you see that the frequency and the impact is now accelerating, going up significantly. And that is something that eventually, without alternative solutions, and for me alternative solutions are broadening the scope, we will start facing issues with insurability and finding the right balance. So going forward, I think to solve this issue, or at least to contribute as an industry to solve the issue, because we cannot do that alone, I think there are three main areas we should look at. First is that balance between insurability and driving inclusion, meaning insurability for insurance companies from a solvency level, funding capabilities, and then of course keeping a premium that is affordable for the customers. And I think we can later in this debate talk a bit more detail what type of solutions are possible, but I heard Frederick and you also already saying that public-private partnerships are key, and I fully agree the solution will be above the insurance industry alone, and it will have to come from partnerships. The second topic we can do more, and we are doing more, is the area, what can we do to prevent and avoid the consequences of climate change? And I'm still talking about claims and consequences. There is a lot of awareness. I think everybody is involved here. customers, insurance companies, but also governments. I take one example. We talk a lot about avoiding claims, but that would require infrastructure investments. And insurance companies are one of the biggest long-term investors in the world. And I see a lot of, I would call, missed opportunities for us to be a key investor together with governments to deliver the infrastructure to mitigate as much as possible the impact and the consequences. And the third one that I think we can discuss on a little bit more is, okay, we are not going to stop climate change because climate change has always happened, but we need to take a turn into the speed and the direction of climate change. And there again, everybody can take his role, also insurance companies, because eventually the long-term solution will come from turning the curve that we have seen in your introduction, to take the turn in that curve. And even then, after taking the turn, it will take many, many years to see eventually the effects, I would say, on claims and mitigation of claims. So for us, I think to keep the model working, which we have been doing, I think, as an industry very well over the last 20 years, we need to broaden the partnership to do this, getting more partners not only involved, because everybody is involved, but at least more aligned and better aligned. And these are the three topics I'm happy to speak about.
Thank you. Thank you. Very clear. Thank you very much. And next we have Hanna from the Finnish Association for Nature Conservation. Very interested as well in hearing your perspective on those questions.
Yeah, thank you. So the Finnish Association for Nature Conservation, we work on several levels, and I myself, my main focus is supporting our Finnish Parliament in legislative work, both in mitigation and adaptation. And we try to make the link between the climate crisis, but also resilience, safety of our society, and show how nature can be a powerful tool also in the fight against global warming. Then we also have a lot of district organizations across the country and also associations which do kind of a practical nature protection work and also restoration of ecosystems, which are really crucial when it comes to, for example, flooding cases here in Finland. We have a lot of peat soils that have been drained, and when they are drained, they cannot hold the water anymore. So we see more flooding because of that, and this is what we are trying to do to stop. I think when it comes to mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, we are seeing more emphasis on the latter ones all the time. However, I think it's important to understand that there is a limit to adaptation and resilience, so we cannot really ignore the mitigation part, and this sector has a crucial role there as well. So I see that all companies need to be aware that their targets and actions need to be compatible with the Paris Agreement, and part of this is, of course, the part, what do you insure? And definitely there are things that you shouldn't insure anymore, and those are fossil fuel industry and the peat industry as well, I think. And that is a big responsibility at the moment, I think, for this sector. Then of course, there's the part of adaptations and resilience. I think, for example, from my experience here in Finland, there are sectors like the forestry sector or agricultural sector which need support both in mitigation and adaptation. They are at the forefront of the heating planet, so to say. These are also often people who don't have a huge income. They are actually in a rather vulnerable situation. However, the practices they currently use are unsustainable, so they would need to work more on the mitigation side, but at the same time the adaptation part is really important. So what we of course try to do is to speak up about these things and support all actors who want to become climate champions. Thanks.
Okay. So thanks very much to you all for those words. I would, before continuing the conversation, remind you that there will be time for Q&A in around 20 minutes or so. You can already introduce your questions through the app, and there will also be a mic circulating at that time for those who prefer the traditional way of asking questions. I would suggest to start to delve into the question of mitigation in the sense of reducing emissions, as you have referred to it, Hanna, and also Hans, you mentioned clearly we cannot stop climate change, but we need to take a turn and do what we can. So, Hanna, you mentioned there is a responsibility for the insurance sector. I think this is a direct question to you, Hans. How do you see the insurance sector taking up this responsibility of trying to act as much as possible in line with the Paris Agreement?
Yeah. Well, I think the exercise we did in-house, we said, look, we are not ourselves the biggest polluter, but we have two main levers. First is we have a lot of investments to do, and we can decide where we invest. And then our organization, so we have 45 million customers around the world, we can incentivize them to contribute to the transition. And I think there we might have a difference of the opinion, because in most cases, I think just cutting insurance or fully cutting investments, I think in extreme areas, I talk about weapon industry and so on, yes. But in many areas, it or will not do the job or it will not be feasible. And to give an example, I'm happy to quote our chief investment officer, who told me once, between brown and green, there are 50 shades of gray. And that's true. And take the example of fossil fuels. Many fossil fuels I talked to and where we decided to invest, many of them have great plans also to go to that green transition. And cutting them off would not be feasible. I take another example, the chemical industry. I had underwriting in the chemical industry. We also took the same discussions like, I'm sorry, but if you do not make a better contribution, we cannot insure you. And the CEO of that company came back to me and says, look, I'll show you what we produce. We produce light materials. And we calculate the reduction of CO2 emissions in cars because they use our material.
Yeah.
And that reduction is way bigger than the pollution we make with producing those materials. So you need to find here a balance, and it is a question of transition. We do two things. The first one, well, actually three. First one, we have said every investment we make today, and that's already fully in place, traditionally goes to a credit filter, and it now also goes to an ESG filter. So if the company does not have clear ESG plans, and that's above a certain threshold, we will not invest. And that's 100% of our investments. More than 10% of our investments are already, I would say, direct impact ESG investments. Windmills, solar parks, public transport, social housing, and so on. And that was a little bit putting a stick in the ground. We have said, what can we do with customers? We are a more retail insurer. And we have said, look, by 24, we want 25% of our products having an active incentive for the customer to make a better contribution to the planet. Driving less, making your home more energy efficient, and all these kind of solutions. And I'm happy to see that in our annual report 23, so 1 year ahead of our ambition, we are able to show that we have already that in 28%. So my key message is, yes, we have a key role to play, but it is not a role of brown-green, it is a role of transition.
Clearly. Laurie, maybe I turn to you as a supervisor, but also you mentioned the consumers, the policyholders, more in the context of adaptation, but is there also something to do in the area of reducing emissions from those angles?
It's a huge area, and I think, a topic in so many of these meetings that we have, and I think insurers and the regulators and those of us in the room, we kind of have the weight of the world on our shoulders right now, because in the transition, we're not quite ready to step away from fossil fuels, and so they still need to be a part of our lives. They're still, as we transition to green. So you're trying to insure the old risks, but at the same time, you're looking at new technology that's being developed and trying to see into the future of, is this a good investment for your underwriting? Is it a good investment, period? At the same time, on the other side, you're looking at your consumers that need to buy products. And how do you work with them to have basically a property or a business or such that is supporting the changes that we're seeing in our environment, to make it a green business, to make it sustainable. I spoke a couple weeks ago and I said, one of my big things is we need to make America, and it's probably true of the world, we need to make it insurable again. But to do that, we have to recognize that we're going through a transition, and the transition is going to take some time, and we have to work with consumers, those that are buying insurance products, to understand what is going to make their property or their home or their business, regardless of what it is, insurable in the future. If insurance were to dry up, that people could not have it, the economic impact worldwide would be massive. And so I think that, as an insurance company, you're sitting with all of this and the weight of the world on your shoulders of making the right decision to still have a foot kind of in the old camp, but absolutely facing the future and what we need to do to correct the carbon emissions and to make the climate change. We're not going to get rid of it. I totally agree with you. It's not going to go away, but maybe we can slow it down and change the trajectory.
Thank you. Hanna, is that you would like to react? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a little bit different perspective on the speed of the transition. So this is the crucial decade, and I think things just are not moving fast enough at the moment. Also, we come from different countries. I realize, so here in Finland, most of our electricity is already fossil-free, for example. My parents only drive an electric car, for example, so we are already quite advanced. Still, we have sectors where we have a lot of problems, but still. And I think the key here is that when it comes to companies, we see many kind of companies. We see companies who are greenwashing, basically. They are saying they are trying to do a transition, but their targets and actions are not compatible with the Paris Agreement. They are not moving fast enough. And then there are companies who are, that they are actually making a difference and a change in a time frame that is necessary. And I think you need to make a distinction here. Are your clients serious or are they not? And I think that's the responsibility of this sector, to ask these difficult questions and asking, are you actually doing what you can, or are you just trying to postpone the inevitable? And I think that it's necessary to understand that with the time frame that we have at the moment, ensuring companies who are not serious, it's actually ensuring climate chaos at the moment. So I think it's a big responsibility at the moment to ask the difficult questions.
Well, I fully agree. I would like also everybody to move towards electric cars and produce all, I would say, electricity in a clean way. Again, we are making a lot of those investments, but we have to be clear, we cannot replace governments. I mean, we cannot decide who gets access to insurance or not. And look what happened with the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, where early movers were blocked because of antitrust issues, and exactly regulators and governments stepping in by saying, look, you do not have the right to refuse insurance for a big group of citizens. So that is a partnership with government, I think, who need to set the framework. I take an example. In Belgium, for instance, it's now a very strong incentive, almost compulsory, that all company cars, and we drive a lot of company cars in Belgium, company cars should be green and electric in the future. So that is something we can then facilitate, we can implement, but we cannot take that decision. So let's be careful that this is again a partnership, but eventually we cannot replace the government.
No, it seems clear that there is indeed a sort of triangle. You have the private sector, the governments, and then the citizens, the people who can also drive changes. Hanna pointed to the fact that Finland may be a bit in advance in this respect, and your group is active in many countries. So do you see also, I don't know, can you point to examples where things are happening faster, and is there a reason for that?
Well, we go way beyond our own countries. For instance, our home base is Belgium, but we are actually the biggest investor on one of the biggest solar parks now in the world in Sweden. We have absolutely no business in Sweden.
Okay.
But we are one of those investors making that possible. So we have a balance sheet of 100 billion that we invest, of which 30 billion is already direct investments. A second topic we work on a lot, because we are a European Asian group, Asia. I think there we have a big issue of inclusion. You have seen in your introduction that Asia is one of these more effective regions in the world, but it's also a region where access to insurance for many, many people is still limited and too limited. So there we are working with programs. How can we drive inclusion, make sure that the effects of the climate change are mitigated? But also the other side, and that's maybe a debate this afternoon when we talk about regulation, we also want to make now our role over the borders. We are, for instance, a big insurer in China as well. But here again, I cannot step over, I would say, the global political landscape, and it's not me eventually who will be able to turn China into a more green economy. Now, that being said, I think at this moment they are going at a faster speed than we do, but that's another debate. So, but again, everybody has his role to play, and we have a very strong role to incentivize with investors and with customers.
Okay, thank you. Mirka, is there anything you would like to add to that topic of reducing emissions? And
yeah, maybe 2 points from a technology company point of view. I think the value that we can bring is definitely more on the scientific side, also sort of addressing and proving what is happening on Earth, like how the climate change is actually rapidly increasing at this. And we've been doing a lot of project monitoring the Arctic and the Arctic ice, and just recently published a publication where we can see the ice melting below and how that has been rapidly increasing, and sort of like changed even the worst scenarios and calculation that we thought about the rise of the seawater. So that's, I think, is one angle. And then coming back to the solutions that we provide for insurance, I think is a overall overarching sustainability angle there. How can data help in event response, and what little actions? I know it's not changing the whole landscape, but those little actions that makes the emissions go down, when you're able to know, you don't need to drive around like crazy around the event, and you'll be able to allocate your resources wisely and beforehand. So I think those may be 2 elements that from a tech company perspective we can add to the topic.
Thanks very much. And maybe we can move to the part more on adaptation and insurability as well. You have all covered the topic one way or another in your introduction, but I think this is really one of the area where we can make a role. I was wondering if you would like to expand on some of what you heard. I heard about we need to be better at not building in the wrong places. Probably there is also an issue of adapting building standards. And then, Hans, you mentioned public-private partnerships. So how can we make progress concretely? How can we accelerate adaptation, which has traditionally not been given the same focus as mitigation, which has always been, until recently, the main focus of all these IPCC discussions, etc. How can we accelerate adaptation? What would be your main recommendation? Whoever would like to start. Hans?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And we used the word already a few times this morning, private-public partnership, to make it accessible for everybody and affordable for everybody. I think we need different layers. I think at the moment in most of the countries we have 3 layers: the direct insurance, then the global reinsurance, and then in many countries the governments who take a specific layer. If I see now the impact that is happening more and more in Europe, and we are here now with Insurance Europe, I think the time has come to start talking about the European layer, even on top of that, because this is all about diversification. So the wider you can take the geographical spread, the more you can diversify. The last 20 years, insurance and reinsurance have taken by far the biggest block of the cost, and they were able to do that with reasonable pricing, what I said in my introduction. I've seen more and more incidents. In Belgium, for instance, we had for the first time a very big intervention of the government, because we really went above the threshold that the industry itself could carry. I think that frequency is going up. I see solution in the UK like Flood Re, I think, which is a nice solution in the UK market. So building different layers, and maybe it is time for Europe to talk about the fourth layer, and that is there European diversification possible?
Thank you, Laurie. From my position in Brussels, I read that states are taking different approaches on those questions. There is also a debate in the US on the question of limiting premiums, capping premiums, I think, but also the role of states in being the insurer of last resort in some states is being explored. Can you enlighten us on those things?
Sure. I mean, the U.S. is kind of a distinct in that every state itself, there's 56 jurisdictions, and 56 jurisdictions are trying to solve the problem themselves. What we do recognize is that it's no longer if you're going to be hit by a nat cat loss or how many, it's when.
Yeah.
And so I think we've seen the consensus in the states that something has to be done to protect the insurability of the U.S., of the world. But when we're looking at that, we tend to focus more right now on pre-disaster mitigation in the states. I mean, there's this part over here that is the post-disaster, but we are looking at grants for home hardening programs. Alabama has a strong one out now, and you're seeing Oregon and California and other states that are being very proactive in working with the consumers, the purchasers of insurance, in making the property or the business insurable, fortifying the homes so that we, as the hurricanes come through Texas or come through Florida, that the losses aren't quite as great as perhaps they would have been with the same storm 10 years ago. The same when we're building in areas that are prone to fire, doing what we can to make sure there's a defensible space, talking to people about putting a minor investment in their home as to how it could stop the loss from ever occurring. And this is all going to take time, but more and more you are seeing the states come up with their own unique programs to address what the disaster or the potential disaster is in their state. For me, Alaska's big enough. In the southeast, we're getting hit by the atmospheric rivers, which is causing landslides and loss of life, not to mention the property. Yeah. In the far north, we're watching the permafrost melt. And as the permafrost melts, you're starting to see the buildings do this. We had our first typhoon north of the Arctic Circle 2 years ago. So I feel like in some ways we're being hit by everything, and depending on which part of the state you're in. So we have to design our own program for our own area, and I think that that's true across the states. Those that are in the Midwest for the storms, the tornadoes and the storms that we've seen lately. These policies, these programs that we're going to put out need to be specific. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We've got to be more in tune to what's happening in that area. I've also seen, or we have seen that in the last 6 months, our Congress has introduced some bills. You were talking about Europe, but our Congress has introduced bills to talk about mitigation efforts, be it fire, be it flood, be it whatever the peril is. And we are hopeful that those will come to fruition, putting more resources and funding to the local communities, and then let the local communities decide how best to use it to fortify their homes.
Okay. Would you like to expand on your points? Yes.
Yeah, I think maybe linking to what you, Laurie, said, that I think that localization is the key, and also the public-private relationship and collaboration between UNDP, between IDF, bringing the insurance ecosystem in place, and especially targeting the efforts to a low-income, vulnerable communities and creative, innovative, really innovative solutions. We've been around creating the parametric, we talk about parametric index-based triggers, especially around communities that maybe can't afford insurance. And I'm not saying that's the end solution that will solve all this, but it can be a complementary solution, complementing the traditional indemnity-based policies. And I think there where we lack the boldness from the industry, so to speak, like we need to get brokers involved, MGAs involved, insurance involved, and be the early adopters to test it out and build other solutions on top of the traditional insurance policies. So I really think that is a one key to the adaptation policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I could just add to that, when you're talking about who we need to get involved in the U.S., we have starting to be involved more with the mortgage companies, the lenders,
Yeah.
because they want such a very traditional product that if you come to them with a parametric product or private flood placement, they're not accepting
Yeah.
it because it's a change. And they need to get on board too with,
Yeah,
with
fully agree.
how insurance is procured.
So it's even extending that ecosystem now. We're talking about it's hard enough to get a one ILS policy in place with 5 stakeholders, and now we're talking about bringing another industry into it. But that's what it really, really requires.
Hanna?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the EU, as we work in the policy sphere, at the moment we know that Europe is the fastest heating continent at the moment, and we know that they are, the risks are high already and they are rising and we are not prepared for them. So now the Commission has come out with communication on climate risk management, and they have several new things that they propose that they would do. And so one of their key things is, of course, that Europe as a whole acts and in a coherent manner. So far it's been more that the individual countries act. And for example, Finland also has its own adaptation plan, so to say.
Yeah.
But this sector definitely, it lacks money. I've been involved with the UN conferences, so it's again this year it's really a question of are actually countries putting enough of money on this this part, and of course also then the private sector as well. So so it's definitely a conundrum, but then I think it's a progress that the EU is at least starting to act as one, and I hope that the member states will support the Commission in their efforts.
I think this point you mentioned about where to put the money that's available is a good one. I think we all know that putting money in prevention is saving a lot of money down the road if it's well done, but we also know that there is no glory in prevention, and politicians prefer to step in after an event because it may bring more votes, for instance. So that's something that the Commission in particular is trying to change, keeping in mind that adaptation has to happen and be at the local level and be based on the right risks, but there is also a lot of coordination that can be done, and I think the adaptation programs of the Commission are a good example of that. I was wondering if there is something you wanted to say in addition on natural-based solutions. You touched on it briefly during your introduction. Is there something you would like to share?
Well, of course, we feel that they are a crucial part here, and I think in the Finnish plan, for example, they are included, but there's still a lot to learn on their role, and I think, for example, the role of restoration is definitely not understood in the case of adaptation. And of course, why do we adapt to prevent loss and damage, which is politically and for insurers, I'm sure, the most difficult part. So I think nature can help a lot, and there we kind of lack the understanding totally. We talk quite a lot of nature policies actually here in Finland and of course globally as well, but the role that nature plays in securing our future and keeping our societies safe is not really understood at the moment, and of course at the moment, for example, Finland has cut funding from nature programs quite significantly, and this is definitely the wrong course of action.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're right that the balance between, I would say, nature and civilization is an important topic, something we as an industry can also contribute to, because we are using more and more models like you are producing. So I see, for instance, flooding areas where I would say when I was a child, yes, naturally this was a flooding area. It was part of nature, but over the years we have started building it. And then, of course, when you have a flooding, then the question is, will you allow to rebuild? Or shouldn't we give it back to nature, which we are very willing to do? Again, the same thing. As an insurance company, you cannot enforce this. You cannot decide for the owner of that property that he cannot rebuild. So that is, again, that partnership that you need between legislation, regulation, and the business practice. But from the insights that we, and reinsurance companies, even more than the direct insurance companies, I think we are a great partner to discuss with governments and with NGO organizations to say, look, from our analysis, we can mitigate a lot of the issues. I take one example. We And the Dutch, a big part of our country, lives under sea level already for generations. The Dutch have been able to manage that very, very well since what happened in 1953. We have now projects, for instance, to plant the dunes again, and we see that almost in a natural way, the dunes get at least 1 meter higher and gives even better protection for the hinterland. So yes, there is a lot to be done, and we have a lot in data and technical learnings over the last few years that we can share.
No, that's very interesting. So insurers should not only engage more with supervisors should not only listen more to insurers and talk to but also to a wider range of stakeholders, probably including NGOs who have the knowledge. That's what you are saying, and so that's another form of public-private partnership and multi-stakeholder engagement, probably. I would like to turn to our audience now to see if there is a question. Yes, if you would like to bring a mic. Is there a possibility to do that? No? On the app, I don't see any question. Yeah.
There's other solutions. So do insurers need to be much bolder because this risk is really accelerating?
Thanks, Ronan.
Well, I'm happy to take your first question. I don't think it is so much yes or no, and really pulling out of the industry, no. I don't think so. We still have good risk diversification, and many countries have already some kind of a partnership with governments in place. It is all about limits. And the first risk is, will the victims be fully compensated, which I think should be our ambition. They should be fully compensated for claims, but will that stay affordable? But I'm actually quite positive with the engagement I see insurance federations, Insurance Europe, insurance companies having with their respective governments, that solutions can be found. And what you describe as a potential situation, pulling back out of the market, would be the worst scenario that I think we should by all means avoid, which I believe is still feasible.
Anyone would like to comment on that? No.
I would just add from the US, I think that sometimes when you saw insurers pull back from regions, it wasn't necessarily because of the losses themselves. Our litigation rates were horrible in Florida. The money was not going so much to the damages as it was to the litigation, and there didn't seem to be a way to cap that. But the Florida legislature has stepped in, and I think you're going to see other states do that. I think also that, if you look at, again, going back to the US being 56 jurisdictions, and we all look at rates a little bit differently, California is, who has lost a number of insurers, has also a different goal, if you will, I don't even know what the right word is, in looking at how rates are set. They're very conservative, trying to protect consumers, and I think in that perhaps even the commissioner there would say that they went too far in trying to protect consumers and not trying to understand the losses of the insurers, and it created some friction. But I think that in the end, you're going to see companies come back to California, come back to Florida, once we figure out how to work together and deal with these natural cat losses.
Yeah, thanks very much. Are there more questions? You can also, I remind you, use the app, but I don't have any on my screen, I'm afraid.
I've got one up there.
If someone can read them out, maybe, because I don't see them.
Sorry, question here from the audience. So my name is Donald Cullinan. I'm from the Central Bank of Ireland, and I'd be particularly interested in Hanna's view on the trade-off or potential trade-off between climate adaptation and nature preservation and restoration. So what I'm thinking particularly is building of things like flood defences and the impact they can have on biodiversity. Thank you.
Yeah, this is definitely not the areas of my super expertise, but there are cases like these as well. Of course, it's a question also on how you build, especially, of course, on this kind of shallow waters, that the impact can be rather severe, I'm afraid. So always when you build into an ocean, the more shallow areas you have, you have more biodiversity. If you go deeper, then it's not as bad. So there are cases like this as well, unfortunately. But in a big scale, when you think about, for example, heat waves and protecting citizens in big cities, for example, then nature areas are really important. And when you think about flooding events in many cases, then natural areas actually protect against flooding. So then the question is there a possibility, for example, on if the flooding is due to, for example, rivers flooding, then is there a way to kind of make the river band more natural so that it absorbs more water and it just doesn't rush through, for example. So cases like these are clear, but your case is unfortunate. Yeah. But I have to admit, I actually live myself in an area in Helsnki which has been built on rather a low ground, and there are discussions on how to protect this area, which is next to a nature protection area. So there are cases like this as well.
Thanks very much. I would like to refer to one of the questions being asked on the app, because it's touching on one of the topics we have not discussed. It's about mandatory insurance, and the question is mandatory insurance a mitigation measure being considered to deal with the climate disasters? It's part of the PPP question to an extent, but we have not talked about mandatory insurance as such.
I can maybe kick it off. I think at least in Europe we are seeing some legislation taking this sort of action.
Yeah.
In Italy they are implementing the new legislation for SME sector where NatCat insurance will be mandatory for SME, and I think that sometimes in a especially low penetration insurance countries it might be the right incentivized or the stick and a carrot, so to speak, to actually make things happen. And obviously that's a strict way to do it, but what we're seeing in Italy that the insurers are taking a big responsibility there, creating the products and supporting the sector or the SME sector to adapt into it. So at least I see it sometimes as a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there is also, no, that's clearly a trend in a way of discussing it. There is obviously various ways of defining mandatory insurance, because it can be mandatory offer, mandatory cover. I think that's what you see also in a number of countries. Hans, what's your take on that, also from being active in various countries?
Well, maybe let me split Europe and Asia here. If I look at Europe, I think, well, once an insurance is affordable, I think most of our citizens will take out that insurance, because I don't think there is an issue on awareness of the impact of climate and flooding. I think everybody is well aware. So I think I'm not sure that it will for Europe make a massive change. But of course we should make sure that everybody has a solution as much as possible, and we see now sometimes government stepping in for the non-insured part, but then we come back to the initial discussion, affordability of premium. When I look at Asia, you cannot make it compulsory because many big groups of the population cannot afford it. So I think for Asia, we are more looking to solutions that ICEYE, for instance, is thinking about. Index-based insurance, statistics-based insurance. We have projects. I've done projects there in Malaysia and India with the farmer community, where you say, okay, we just go for the whole region, and then we give a certain compensation for the farmers. Because I think today it is a shot a bit too long to impose on farmers. For instance, I think one group in Asia to impose individual insurance on them. I think that is I don't think that's going to be realistic and feasible,
Okay.
and we should look at tech and data to help those people to get compensated.
Yeah. Good, thanks very much. I think we are reaching the end of our panel, and I would like to invite our panelists to, as a conclusion, maybe share their number one recommendation on how to move ahead in view of increasing resilience, increasing insurability, reducing protection. Maybe your number one focus for advice for all of us.
Should I start?
Mirka, why not?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to be repeating myself that I think it's a partnership. Like the data is there, the technology is there, the ways of doing things differently is there, but it's now a way getting our heads together. And I really mean there are early adopters in insurance, but having brokers and the pricing actuaries, everything involved in the work, I think that's where we can really make the change.
Thank you, Hanna.
Yeah, I think what I've said already, I think you need to pull out of the money from the fossil fuel industry. That's really crucial. And then the other part is really protecting the vulnerable, most vulnerable, and harnessing the power of nature in the adaptation work. And lastly, I would say, as the time is really pressing, we really need more climate champions. Otherwise, this change will not happen. So the climate movement is open. You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Hans.
Well, I would also like to come back to the idea of partnership. I think that is needed, and of course insurers are very open and willing to collaborate because we are on the part of mitigating the issue, making sure that climate change can take a different direction, but we also, of course, an important player in the solution of the impact of climate change that we are already facing today. So partnership with all stakeholders. But I would just like to make one caveat, which Frédéric made in his opening speech. When we then design solution, when we design regulation, let's then also do a good impact study first of what we design, and that we do not bring more regulatory complexity without added value. So it must be, I think, the right regulation and the right partnership for the right problem. But the insurance industry is, I think, very open to take up that discussion.
Thank you. Sorry.
In the US, I don't think, and this goes back for years, I don't think we've done a really good job of when we have high school seniors or college graduates of understanding what they're walking into as to buy a home, to start a business. And I think that we could do a much better, I think this is a generational problem, that if we start educating people, young consumers, as to what to expect when they build their home, when they start their business, the green technology of what is out there to make the planet better, to make insurance more accessible, to make it more affordable. I think the sooner we can talk to young people, the sooner we can get our message across as to insurance is a product you're always going to need, but this is how to make it insurable. And I think the more education we can do, starting with the children, how to build this back so that they don't come out thinking in the US they can call State Farm and they'll insure everything, because that's just, the market's changed. Insurance is not going back to what it was 20 years ago. And to educate them what it's going to be going forward.
Thank you. Well, that's quite a number of recommendations and good food for thought. So thanks very much. I think we've managed to cover quite a bit of ground and while respecting the time allocated to us. So I would like to invite you all to join me in thanking our panelists for a very good and lively discussion.